Philosophy as rational inquiry. In this topic, we are going to be discussing the traits of philosophical knowledge. The ability to identify these traits is very important in that understanding their characteristics will go a long way in indicating some of the qualities we are expected to possess as people aspiring to become profound thinkers. I can say that a philosopher is someone who possesses an intellectual power in the various branches of philosophy such as aesthetic, ethics, epistemology, philosophy of science, logic, metaphysics, social theory, philosophy of religion, and political philosophy. So before you claim I'm a philosopher, first ask yourself your contribution towards any of these branches of philosophy. Don't get Ometa wrong. There is difference between I'm doing philosophy and I am a philosopher. Having understand what we mean by philosophy and philosophers, let's now expatiate on philosophical knowledge. First of all, what are the things? When we hear them, we will know that these are philosophical knowledge. Or what comes to our mind when we hear some phrases or certain terminologies like fundamental inquiry and special inquiry. What are these phrases trying to tell us? They denote philosophical knowledge. So let's get started with fundamental inquiry down to special inquiry. Under fundamental inquiry, we have what is known as theoretical philosophy and practical philosophy. Theoretical philosophy explains the basic categories and structures of whatever exists. When we hear things like ontology or metaphysics, notice that what the text or the person is talking about is theoretical philosophy. Also, when we are reflecting on the essential future of human beings, that is individual and the society, and sometimes we hear something like anthropology, this talks about the philosophy of mind. So anthropology or philosophy of mind is often used when discussing the reflection of the essential future of human being and social life in the theoretical philosophy. Then we have cosmology or philosophy of nature. This is a study of the nature of knowledge and how it can be achieved. It is closely related to the theory of knowledge or epistemology, which is the study of the nature of knowledge and how it can be achieved. And finally, we have logic, which is the study of the forms of valid reasoning. So these are theoretical philosophy. Now, to practical philosophy. Here we talk about moral life, or otherwise known as moral philosophy. Anytime we hear something like ethics, we should note that what the text or the person is talking about is practical philosophy. This study about what is good and evil, right or wrong. This aspect of practical philosophy study the principle of morality, that is how individuals should live in society or individual and social life. Another aspect of practical philosophy is what is known as poetic or philosophy of doing or producing, which include aesthetic, a study of the basic principle of the appreciation of art and beauty, including what makes something a work of art and how we interpret it. And finally, in practical philosophy, we have philosophy of technique, a reflection on the technical activities, their place, role and value in human life. So, these are practical philosophy. Now, let's look into what is known as special inquiries. But before then, I want us to understand that philosophy is a king of all disciplines. What I mean by this is that whether you are an economist, a scientist, a social theorist, a lawyer, a political scientist, and what have you, once you want to go deep and further inquire into any of these disciplines, you are doing philosophy. Thus, special inquiry into the philosophy of science, for example, calls for a deeper reflection into scientific knowledge. According to Wikipedia, and I quote, Philosophy of science is a branch of philosophy concerned with the foundations, methods, and implications of science. The central question of this study concerns what qualifies as science, the reliability of scientific theories, and the ultimate purpose of science. This study overlaps with metaphysics, ontology, and epistemology. For example, when it explores the relationship between science and truth. Philosophy of science focuses on metaphysical, epistemic, and semantic aspects of science. Unquote. Philosophy of science simply is a study of the method for establishing scientific knowledge. The philosophical question that birthed philosophy of science are what are the ultimate purpose for science and what can be qualified as science. Still on spatial inquiry, we have social and political philosophy, which is a study of the fundamental principle of society and state. This aspect of philosophy asks how institutions governing collective life, such as government, ought to be arranged, and asks how shared decision-making should be conducted. Is there a limit to the power of the state? What justice demands in terms of distribution of the benefits from social cooperation? And what is the nature and value of freedom? These and more are the questions we try to address in social and political philosophy. Then, we have social science theory. According to the Oxford Bibliography, and I quote, social science theory refers to ideas, argument, hypotheses, thought experiments, and explanatory speculations about how and why human society or element or structure of such society come to be, formed, changed, and develop over time or disappear. Usually supported in research institutions as a core component of the discipline of sociology, social theory most commonly encompasses the range of explanatory concepts, analytical tools, and heuristic devices on which sociologists and social scientists draw in their efforts to interpret statistical or qualitative data about particular empirical social phenomena. Unquote. There are different theories as regard to social science theory, but this particular theory explains the general idea of social science theory. What can we make out from this theory? Social science theory main objective is to look into the fundamental questions about societal phenomena and ways of establishing social scientific knowledge. After social science theory, under spatial inquiries, we have philosophy of law, reflection on the juridical order, and we have philosophy of work, a development of philosophical inquiry about ordinary human activities. Philosophy of religion, a study of the significance of religious practices. Philosophy of language, a study of the basic structure of language and of how language connects within the world. Philosophy of history, a reflection into the course of events and on the status and the method of historic knowledge. So when we talk about philosophy of this or philosophy of that, we generally talk about a deeper reflections into that particular aspect of disciplines. The philosophical attitude. Before I go into our course manual to read some extracts there for you, I want us to reflect once again into the following questions. Who exactly is a philosopher, and how do I identify them? A philosopher is someone who established theories or gives worldviews on questions related to metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, logic, and other aspects of theoretical and practical philosophy. A person who possesses such intellectual abilities and power, a philosopher should be able to analyze points and establish persuasive and valid arguments. I hope from the above explanation of who is a philosopher, we will now be able to follow and understand the following extract from our course manual, course code PHI 104, Methodology of Rational Inquiry, University of Ibadan, as I read. Philosophical attitude. I read. Philosophical attitude is characterized by a rational search for the understanding of things by means of arguments that need to be proved by reason. Such arguments are expected to follow the law of logic, but there may also be philosophy insight and conviction that do not arise from logical argumentation. For example, in the perception of values, science for its part consists largely in a combination of experimental data and logical laws. Theoretical developments may occupy a greater place in some sectors of scientific knowledge. The actual contribution of such theoretical elements towards knowledge of reality is judged by and larger in the light of a philosophical background, be it realist, empiricist, or idealist. In the modern age, new developments took place which gave a distinctive character to scientific activities. Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626, and Galileo Galilei, 1564 to 1642, described the method and purpose of scientific knowledge. For Galileo, scientific work must be based on an experimental method with systematic observations and upon a mathematical reading of the universe. The cosmos is like a large book which can only be read in the language of mathematics. Philosophy, says Galileo, delights in the search for essences or essential characteristics. But modern science is happy with its knowledge of some properties of natural beings. In our inquiries, we either attempt to penetrate the true inner essence of natural substances, or we limit ourselves to knowledge of some of their properties. I hold the first thing impossible, but if we want to bring our attention to grasping some properties of things, then it seems to me that we must not despair of our ability to acquire it. Galileo did not object to a philosophy which would look for a general view of the universe, a cosmology, but he gave a new object to scientific work distinct from the philosophical one. In a similar vein, Descartes, 1596 to 1650, held that a new philosophy can provide useful concepts to science. He was both a philosopher and a man of science. He discovered things in mathematics and practiced the experimental method. At the same time, he developed basic philosophical notions which were consonant with the new approach of natural science. For example, Descartes' distinction between two main kinds of substance, mind and matter, including a definition of matter as what is extended. One of the characteristics of extended matter is that it can be measured. A scientific observation concerns mainly measurable things. What is measured can be compared, related to other things with the help of mathematical formulas or through logical relations. All of this is typical of modern science. It can be said, indeed, that Descartes' philosophical endeavor provides a number of fundamental concepts which could go together with the recent development of science in the 17th century. The influence of empiricism. Let's get started with this topic by describing what is empiricism and what the empiricist holds. Before then, what we should bear in mind is that the problem of empiricism is an issue of knowledge. It is part of the attempt to explain what can be justified as a true knowledge. We have different people with different views on how we can know something, or whether we can actually know something at all. Rationalists, for example, suggest that we can know something through reasoning. Skeptics believe that we don't know anything even though we think we know. Generally speaking, empiricism, on the other hand, is a belief that sense experience is the only source of knowledge. So, we have different views, all pushing towards how we can arrive at a true knowledge or true belief. An aspect of epistemology, known as narrative epistemology, even suggests that the way to a true knowledge is by storytelling. In this topic, in our course manual, Philosophy 104, The Influence of Empiricism, I will be discussing the notion of two different philosophers, namely David Hume and Immanuel Kant. First of all, I would like us to look at how empiricism was viewed in the early periods. This kind of scenario is popular in Nigeria. Perhaps you have come across a traditional medicine man who appealed to inappropriate authority by claiming to be expert in healing all kinds of illness and at the same time condemning the scientific approved drugs. And you ask a professional medical doctor who has spent years in studying the cause of the illness and their remedy to describe this traditional medicine man without missing word. The medical doctor will tell you that the traditional medicine man is a quack. That was how empiricism was viewed at the beginning of the early modern period. At this time, empiricism has no ground at any intellectual debate. In fact, empiric was used to abuse people, particularly referred to as quack doctors, who prefer medicine they claim work on experience and reject orthodox medicine. It was around 17th century that scholars began to use empiricism as an approach to modern philosophy and science. Let us now go into David Hume and Immanuel Kant's notion of empiricism. David Hume was a super advocate of empiricism and passionate critic of rationalism. I felt it is not going to make sense enough to just paraphrase some of the things he said about empiricism and rationalism. So I will be reading a full text of him I got from BC Campus on classical reading in Western philosophy. It is long, but I have to, so I read. All the objects of human reason or inquiry may be naturally divided into two kind relations of ideas and matters of fact. The first kind are the science of geometry, algebra, and arithmetic. In short, every affirmation is either intuitively or demonstratively certain. That the square of a hypotenuse is equal to the square of the two sides is a proposition which expresses the relation between these figures. That 3 times 5 is equals to half of 30 expresses a relation between these numbers. Prepositions of this kind are discoverable by the mere operation of thought without dependence on what is in existence anywhere in the universe. Though there were never a circle or triangle in nature, the truth demonstrated by Euclid would forever retain their certainty and evidence. Matters of fact, which are the second object of human reason, are not ascertained in the same manner, nor our evidence of their truth. However, of a like nature with foregoing century of every matter of fact is still possible, because it can never imply contradiction, and is conceived by the mind with the same facility and distinctness as if ever so conformable to reality. That the sun will not rise tomorrow is less intelligible proposition and implies no more contradiction than the affirmation that it will rise. We should, in vain, therefore, attempt to demonstrate is falsehood where is demonstratively false. It would imply a contradiction and could never be distinctly conceived by the mind. It may therefore be a subject worthy of curiosity to inquire what is the nature of that evidence which assures us of any real existence, a matter of fact, beyond the present testimony of our senses or the record of our memory. This part of philosophy, if it is observable, has been little cultivated, either by the ancient or moderns, and therefore our doubts and errors in the prosecution of so important inquiry may be the more excusable, while we march through such difficult paths without any guides or direction. They may even prove useful by exciting curiosity and destroying that implicit faith and security which is the bone of all reasoning and free inquiry. The discovery of defects in the common philosophy, if any such be, will I not presume be discouragement, but rather an incitement, as usual, to attempt something more full and satisfactory than has yet been proposed to the public. All reasoning concerning matter of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. By means of that relation alone, we can go beyond the evidence of our memory and senses. If you are to ask a man why he believes any matter of fact which is absent, for instance, that his friend is in the country or in France, he would give you a reason, and this reason would be some other fact, as a letter received from him, or the knowledge of his former resolution and promises. A man found in a watch or any other machine in a desert island would conclude that there had once been men in that island. All our reasoning concerning facts are of the same nature, and here it is constantly supposed that there is a connection between the present fact and that which is inferred from it. Where there is nothing to bind them together, the inference would be entirely precarious. The hearing of an articulate voice and rational discourse in the dark assures us of the presence of some person. Why? Because these are the effects of the human make and fabric, and closely connected with it. If we shall anatomize all the other reasonings of this nature, we shall find that they are founded on the relation of cause and effect, and that this relation is either near, remote direct, or collateral. Heat and light are collateral effect of fire, and the one effect may just be inferred from the other. If we would satisfy ourselves, therefore, concerning the nature of that evidence which assures us of matter of fact, we must inquire how we arrive at the knowledge of cause and effect. I shall venture to affirm as a general proposition, which admits no exception, that the knowledge of this relation is not in any instance attained by reasonings priori, but arises entirely from experience, when we find that any particular objects are constantly conjoined with each other. Let an object be presented to a man of ever so strong natural with reason and abilities. If that object be entirely new to him, he will not be able, by the most accurate examination of his sensible qualities, to discover any of his causes or effects. Adam, though his rational faculties be supposed at the very first entirely perfect, could not have inferred from the fluidity and transparency of water that it would suffocate him, or from the light and warmth of fire that it would consume him. No object ever discovers by the qualities which appear to the senses, either the causes which produce it or the effect which will arise from it, nor can our reason, unnecessitated by experience, ever draw any inference concerning real existence and matter of fact. These prepositions that causes and effect are discoverable not by reason but by experience will really be admitted with regard to such object, as we remember to have once been altogether unknown to us. Since we must be conscious of the utter inability which we then lay under for telling what would arise from them, present two smooth pieces of marble to a man who has no tincture of natural philosophy. He will never discover that they will adhere together in such a manner as to require great force to separate them in a direct line, while they make so small a resistance to a literal pressure. Such events as bear little analogy to the common course of nature are also readily confessed to be known only by experience. Nor does any man imagine that explosion of gunpowder or the attraction of a lodestone could ever be discovered by argument. In like manner, when an effect that is supposed to depend upon an intricate machinery or secret structure of parts make no difficulty in attributing all our knowledge of it to experience, who will assert that he can give the ultimate reason why milk or bread is proper nourishment for a man and not for a lion or a tiger? But the same truths may not appear at first sight to have the same evidence with regard to events which have become familiar to us from our first appearance in the world, which bear a close analogy to the whole course of nature, and which suppose to depend on the simple qualities of objects without any secret structure of parts. We are apt to imagine that we could discover this effect by the mere operation of our reason without experience. Where we fancy that we were brought on a sudden into this world, we could at first have inferred that one billiard ball would communicate motion to another upon impulse, and that we need not to have waited for the event in order to pronounce with certainty concerning it. Such is the influence of custom, that where it is strongest, it is not only covers our natural ignorance, but even cancels itself and seems not to take place, merely because it is found in the highest degree. But to convince us that all the laws of nature and all the operations of the body, without exception, are known only by experience, the following reflections may perhaps suffice. Were any object presented to us, and were we required to pronounce concerning the effect which we result from it without consulting past observation, after what manner, I beseech you, must the mind proceed in this operation? It must invent or imagine some event which it ascribes to the object as its effect, and it is plain that this invention must be entirely arbitrary. The mind can never possibly find the effect in the supposed cause by most accurate scrutiny and examination, for the effect is totally different from the cause, and consequently can never be discovered in it. Motion in the second billiard ball is quite distinct even from motion in the first, nor is there anything in the one to suggest the smallest hint of the other. A stone or a piece of metal raised into the air and left without any support immediately falls. But to consider the matter a priori, is there anything we discover in this situation which can beget the idea of a downward rather than an upward or any other motion in the stone or metal? And as the first imagination or invention of a particular effect in all natural operation is arbitrary where we consult not experience, so must we also esteem the supposed tie or connection between the cause and the effect which bind them together and render it impossible that any other effect could result from the operation of that cause. When I see, for instance, a billiard ball moving in a straight line towards another, even suppose motion in the second ball should by accident be suggested to me as the result of their contact or impulse, may I not conceive that 100 different events might as well follow from that cause? May not both these balls remain at absolute rest? May not the first ball return in a straight line or leap up from the second in any line or direction? All these suppositions are consistent and conceivable. Why then should we give the preference to one which is no more consistent or conceivable than the rest? All our reasonings, a priori, will never be able to show us any foundation for this preference. In a word, every effect is a distinct event from its cause. It could not therefore be discovered in the cause and the first invention or conception of it, a priori, must be entirely arbitrary. And even after it is suggested, the conjunction of it with the cause must appear equally arbitrary, since there are always many other effects which to reason must seem fully as consistent and natural. In vain, therefore, should we pretend to determine any single event or infer any cause or effect without the assistance of observation and experience. Hence, we may discover the reason why no philosopher who is rational and modest has ever pretended to assign the ultimate cause of any natural operation, or to show distinctly the action of the power which produces any single effect in the universe. It is confessed that the utmost effort of human reason is to reduce the principle productive of natural phenomena to a greater simplicity, and to resolve the many particular effects into a few general causes by means of reasoning from analogy, experience, and observation. But as to the cause of these general causes, we should in vain attempt their discovery, nor shall we ever be able to satisfy ourselves by any particular explication of them. These ultimate springs and principles are totally shut up from human curiosity and inquiry. Elasticity, gravity, cohesion of parts, communication of motion by impulse, these are probably the ultimate cause and principle which we shall ever discover in nature, and we may esteem ourselves sufficiently happy if by accurate inquiry and reasoning we can trace up the particular phenomena to, or near to, this general principle. The most perfect philosophy of the natural kind only stave off our ignorance a little longer. as perhaps the most perfect philosophy of moral or metaphysical kind, serve only to discover the larger portion of it. Thus, the observation of human blindness and weakness is the result of all philosophy and meets us at every turn in spite of our endeavor to elude or avoid it. Nor is geometry, when taken into the assistance of natural philosophy, ever able to remedy this effect or lead us into the knowledge of ultimate cause by all the accuracy of reasoning for which it is so justly celebrated. Every part of mixed mathematics proceed upon the supposition that certain laws are established by nature in her operations, and abstract reasoning are employed either to assist experience in the discovery of these laws or to determine their influence in particular instances where it depends upon any precise degree of distance and quantity. Thus, it is a law of motion discovered by experience that the moment or force of any body in motion is in the compound ratio or proportion of its solid content and its velocity, and consequently that a small force may remove the greatest obstacle or raise the greatest weight if by any contrivance or machinery we can increase the velocity of that force so as to make it an overmatch for its antagonist. Geometry assists us in the application of this law by giving us the just dimension of all the parts and figures which can enter into any species of machine. But still the discovery of the law itself is owing merely to experience, and all the abstract reasoning in the world could never lead us one step towards the knowledge of it. When we reason a priori and consider merely any object or cause as it appears to the mind in depth of all observation, it never could suggest to us the notion of any distinct object, such as its effect, much less show us the inseparable and involvable connection between them. A man must be very sagacious who could discover by reasoning that crystal is the effect of heat and ice of cold without being previously acquainted with the operation of these qualities. But we have not yet attained any tolerable satisfaction with regards to the equation first proposed. Each solution still gives rise to a new equation as difficult as the foregoing and leads us on to further inquiries. When it asks, what is the nature of all our reasonings concerning matter of fact? The proper answer seems to be that they are found on the relation of cause and effect. When again is asked, what is the foundation of all our reasonings and conclusions concerning that relation? It may be replied in one word, experience. But if we still carry on our sifting humor and ask what is the foundation of all conclusion from experience, this implies a new question, which may be of more difficult solution and explication. Philosophers that give themselves airs of superior wisdom and sufficiency have a hard task when they encounter persons of inquisitive disposition, who push them from every corner to which they retreat, and who are sure at last to bring them to some dangerous dilemma. The best expedient to prevent this confusion is to be modest in our pretensions, and even to discover the difficulties ourselves before it is objected to us. By this means, we may make a kind of merit of our very ignorance. I shall content myself in this section with an easy task, and shall pretend only to give a negative answer to the question here proposed. I say then that even after we have experience of the operation of cause and effect, our conclusions from that experience are not founded on reasoning or any process of the understanding. This answer we must endeavor both to explain and to defend. It must certainly be allowed that nature has kept us at a great distance from all her secrets, and has afforded us only the knowledge of a few superficial qualities of objects, while she conceals from us those powers and principles on which the influence of those objects entirely depends. Our senses inform us of the color, weight, and consistency of bread, but neither sense nor reason can ever inform us of those qualities which fit it for the nourishment and the support of a human body. Sight or feeling convey an idea of the actual motion of bodies, but as to that wonderful force or power which would carry on a moving body forever in a continued change of place, and which bodies never lose but by communicating it to others, of this we cannot form the most distant conceptions. But notwithstanding this ignorance of natural powers and principles, we always presume when we see like sensible qualities that they have like secret powers, and expect that effects similar to those which we have experienced will follow from them. If a body of like color and consistency with that bread which we have formerly eaten be presented to us, we make no scruple of repeating the experiment and foresee with certainty, with nourishment and support. Now, this is a process of the mind or thought, of which I would willingly know the foundation. It is allowed on all hands that there is no known connection between the sensible qualities and the secret powers, and consequently that the mind is not led to form such a conclusion concerning their constant and regular conjunction by anything which it knows of their nature. As to past experience, it can be allowed to give direct and certain information of those precise objects only, and that precise period of time which fell under its cognizance. But why this experience should be extended to future times, and to other objects which for aught we know may be only in appearance similar, this is the main question on which I would insist. The bread which I formerly eat nourishes me, that is, a body of such sensible qualities was at that time endowed with such secret power. But does it follow that other bread must also nourish me at another time, and that like sensible qualities must always be attained with like secret power? The consequence seems nowise necessary. At least it must be acknowledged that there is here a consequence drawn by the mind, that there is a certain step taken, a process of thoughts and an inference which wants to be explained. These two propositions are far from the same. I have found that such an object has always been attained with such an effect, and I foresee that other objects which are in appearance similar will be attained with similar effect. I shall allow, if you please, that the one proposition may just be inferred from the other. I know in fact that it is always inferred. But if you insist that the inference is made by a chain of reasoning, I desire you to produce that reasoning. The connection between this proposition is not intuitive. There is required a medium which may enable the mind to draw such an inference, if indeed it be drawn by reasoning and arguments. What that medium is, I must confess, passes my comprehension, and it is incumbent on those to produce it, who assert that it really exists and is the origin of all our conclusions concerning matter of fact. These negative arguments must certainly, in process of time, become altogether convincing. If many penetrating and able philosophers shall turn their inquiries this way, and no one be ever able to discover any connecting proposition or intermediate step which supports the understanding in this conclusion. But as the question is yet near, every reader may not trust so far to his own penetration as to conclude, because an argument escaped his inquiry, that therefore it does not really exist. For this reason, it may be requisite to venture upon a more difficult task, and enumerating all the branches of human knowledge, endeavor to show that none of them can afford such an argument. All reasoning may be divided into two kinds, namely demonstrative reasoning, or that concerning relation of ideas, and moral reasoning, or that concerning matter of fact and existence. That there are no demonstrative arguments in the case seems evident, since it implies no contradiction that the cause of nature may change, and that an object seemingly like those which we have experienced may be attained with different or contradictory effects. May I not clearly and distinctly conceive that a body falling from the clouds, and which in all other respects resembles snow, has yet the taste of salt or feeling of fire? Is there any more intelligible proposition than to affirm that all the trees will flourish in December and January, and decay in May and June? Now, whatever is intelligible and can be distinctly conceived implies no contradiction, and can never be proved false by any demonstrative argument or abstract reasoning a priori. If we be therefore engaged by argument to put trust in past experience and make it the standard of our future judgments, these arguments must be probable only, or such as regard matter of fact and re-existence according to the division above mentioned. But that there is no argument of this kind must appear if our explication of that species of reasoning be admitted as solid and satisfactory. We have said that all arguments concerning existence are founded on the relation of cause and effect, that our knowledge of that relation is derived entirely from experience, and that all our experimental conclusions proceed upon the supposition that the future will be comfortable to the past. To endeavor, therefore, the proof of this last supposition by probable arguments or arguments regarding existence must be evidently going in circle and taking that for granted, which is the very point in question. In reality, all arguments from experience are founded on the similarity which we discover among natural objects, and by which we are induced to expect effects similar to those which we have found to follow from such objects. And though known, but a fool or madman will ever pretend to dispute the authority of experience or to reject the great guide of human life. It may be surely be allowed a philosopher to have such curiosity at least as to examine the principle of human nature, which gives this mighty authority to experience and makes us draw advantage from that similarity which nature has placed among different objects. From causes which appear similar, we expect similar effects. This is the sum of all our experimental conclusions. Now, it seems evident that if this conclusion were formed by reason, it would be as perfect at first and upon one instance as after over so long a course of experience. But the case is far otherwise. Nothing so like as egg, yet no one, on account of this appearing similarity, expects the same taste and relish in all of them. It is only after a long course of uniform experiment in any kind that we attain a firm reliance and security with regard to a particular event. Now, where is that process of reasoning which from one instance draws a conclusion so different from that which it infers from 100 instances that are no wise different from that single one? This question I propose as much for the sake of information as with an intention of raising difficulties. I cannot imagine such reasoning, but I keep my mind still upon to instruction. If anyone will vouchsafe to bestow it on me, should it be said that from a number of uniform experiments we infer a connection between the sensible qualities and the secret powers? This, I must confess, seems the same difficulty couched in different terms. The question still recurs: on what process of argument this inference is founded? Where is the medium, the interposing ideas which join preposition so very wide of each other? It is confessed that the color consistence and other sensible qualities of bread appear not of themselves to have any connection with the secret power of nourishment and support. For otherwise, we could infer these secret powers from the first appearance of these sensible qualities without the aid of experience, contrary to the sentiment of all philosophers, and contrary to plain matter of fact. Here then is our natural state of ignorance with regard to the power and influence of all objects. How is this remedied by experience? It only shows us a number of uniform effects resulting from certain objects, and teaches us that those particular objects at that particular time were endowed with such powers and forces. When a new object endowed with similar sensible qualities is produced, we expect similar powers and forces and look for a like effect. From a body of like color and consistence with bread, we expect like nourishment and support. But this surely is a step or progress of the mind which wants to be explained. When a man says, "I have found in all past instances such sensible qualities conjoined with such secret powers," and when he says, "Similar sensible qualities will always be conjoined with similar secret powers," he is not guilty of tautology, nor are these propositions in any respect the same. You say that the one proposition is an inference from the other, but you must confess that the inference is not intuitive, neither is it demonstrative. Of what nature is it then? To say it is experimental is begging the question, for all inference from experience suppose as their foundation that the future will resemble the past. and that similar powers will be conjoined with similar sensible qualities. If there be any suspicion that the course of nature may change, and that the past may be no rule for the future, all experience become useless and can give rise to no inference or conclusion. It is impossible, therefore, that any argument from experience can prove this resemblance of the past to the future, since these arguments are founded on the supposition of that resemblance. Let the course of things be allowed hitherto over so regular, that alone, without some new argument or inference, prove not that, for the future, it will continue so. In vain do you pretend to have learned the nature of body from your past experience. Their secret nature, and consequently all their effects and influence, may change without any change in their sensible qualities. This happens sometimes and with regard to some objects. Why may it not happen always and with regard to all objects? What logic, what process of argument secures you against this supposition? My plot is, you say, refutes my doubts, but you mistake the purport of my question. As an agent, I am quite satisfied in the point, but as a philosopher who has some share of curiosity, I will not say skepticism. I want to learn the foundation of this inference. No reading, no inquiry has yet been able to remove my difficulty or give me satisfaction in a matter of such importance. Can I do better than propose the difficulty to the public, even though perhaps I have small hopes of obtaining a solution? We shall at least by these means be sensible of our ignorance if we do not augment our knowledge. I must confess that a man is guilty of unpardonable arrogance who concludes because an argument has escaped his own investigation that therefore it does not really exist. I must also confess that though all the learned for several ages should have employed themselves in fruitless search upon any subject, it may still perhaps be rash to conclude positively that the subject must therefore pass all human comprehension. Even though we examine all the sources of our knowledge and conclude them unfit for such a subject, there may still remain a suspicion that the enumeration is not complete or the examination not accurate. But with regard to the present subject, there are some consideration which seems to remove all this accusation of arrogance or suspicion of mistake. It is certain that the most ignorant and stupid peasant, nay, infants, nay, even brute beasts improve by experience and learn the qualities of natural objects by observing the effect which results from them. When a child has felt the sensation of pain from touching the flame of a candle, he will be careful not to put his hand near any candle. But we expect a similar effect from a cause which is similar in its sensible qualities and appearance. If you assert, therefore, that the understanding of the child is led into this conclusion by any process of argument or ratiocination, I may just require you to produce that argument, nor have you any pretense to refuse so equitable demand. You cannot say that the argument is abstruse and may possibly escape your inquiry, since you confess that it is obvious to the capacity of a mere infant. If you hesitate therefore a moment, or if after reflection you produce any intricate or profound argument, You in a manner give up the equation and confess that it is not reasoning which engage us to suppose the past resembling the future, and to expect similar effect from cause which are to appearance similar. This is the proposition which I intend to enforce in the present section. If I be right, I pretend not to have made any mighty discovery. And if I be wrong, I must acknowledge myself to be indeed a very backward scholar, since I cannot now discover an argument which it seems was perfectly familiar to me long before I was out of my cradle. End of Hume's reading. Yes, I've just finished reading David Hume, and of course, he proved by his writing that he is indeed a born philosopher. He made a lot of points in his critiques against rationalism and his stance for empiricism, though not absolutely right. I will be reading a few summary texts of Immanuel Kant, the man who balanced the arguments on empiricism and rationalism. I got this text from sparknote.com/philosophy. Kant's philosophy has been called a synthesis of rationalism and empiricism. From rationalism, he takes the idea that we can have a priori knowledge of significant truths, but reject the idea that we can have a priori metaphysical knowledge about the nature of things in themselves, God or the soul. From empiricism, he takes the idea that knowledge is essentially knowledge of experience, but reject the idea that we cannot learn any necessary truth about experience, and in doing so, he rejects Hume's skepticism. He is able to create this synthesis largely thanks to a radical reconception of the nature of knowledge that comes from experience. Though empiricism and rationalism may have disagreed about the value or certainty of knowledge from experience, they both generally thought of the mind as a natural receptor. Knowledge from experience was simply the report of the senses. Kant pointed out that our knowledge of experience extends far beyond what the senses can report. Our senses can report sensation, but they cannot give this sensation a structure in space and time or organize them according to cause and effects. According to Kant, our faculties of sensibility and understanding are largely responsible for what we think of as knowledge from experience. By giving our mind this complex internal structure, Kant makes room for a great deal of a priori knowledge. Though the sensations that are the basis for all our experience come from things in themselves, any regularity or structure we find in these sensations comes from our mental concepts. Thus, why Kant does not slip into the idealist position of saying that reality is all a matter of perception, he does claim that the laws of nature are the laws of our mental faculties. For something to be an objective law, it must be synthetic and it must be a priori. And Kant identifies the possibility of synthetic, a priori knowledge within the structure of our mental faculties. If our sense of order and regularity is not something we find in experience, but something we impose upon experience, the study of this order and regularity is a study of our own faculties rather than a study of experience. Kant reconceived the purpose of metaphysics as being one of critique. We must seek to understand how knowledge is structured, and consequently how the various concepts of our mental faculties are organized. This is an important step for philosophy. After Kant published his work, There was been less interest in making extravagant claims about the nature of the universe, and greater emphasis on determining what we can know and on what ground we can claim to know it. The German idealists, notably Hegel, were the first to call into question Kant's concept of the things in itself. Kant insists that while all we can perceive are appearances, the appearances are caused by things in themselves that are outside the realms of experience. Because they are outside the realms of experience, they are also outside the realms of space and time and any of the regularities we perceive in nature.